to start off, I want to introduce myself. My name is Leah Mudd. I am the second year graduate assistant with New Student and Family Programs, and I'm super excited to have y'all today. So before we get started with what we're going to dive into tonight, I do want to share my screen and do a nice little welcome. So first, I would like to welcome y'all. So tonight's topic for our family webinar series is going to be fraternity and sorority life. And so we're excited to talk to y'all about that today. We do have some of our friends from the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, Chris and Freddie, who are here with us tonight. So they will get to all of your questions. I'm sure that y'all have very, very soon. First, wanted to say congratulations. I know we congratulate our students a lot. We are excited to have them, but we are also excited to have y'all here and want to congratulate y'all. It is a huge feat to get into Florida State, and we want to thank y'all for your time, your effort, and your dedication to your students, and congratulate y'all as well. So we're excited to have y'all. Wanted to dive in a little bit about Family Connection. So Family Connection is a program through New Student and Family Programs, and it's really just a way to keep our students and our families connected to what's going on. I know a lot of the times students may not always keep their family members up to date as to what's going on around campus or what their experience is like. And so we're kind of here with Family Connection to bridge that gap and give you all of the information and what your students is experiencing, what's happening around campus, all of those great things. So Family Connection is a great way to kind of bridge that gap and get some more information on that end as well. So there are plenty of ways to stay connected with New Student and Family Programs, Family Connection, keeping up with your student and what's going on campus around them and what they are experiencing. And so here are some great ways to stay connected with us, and we can definitely drop those at the end of the webinar, but just wanted to go ahead and share those with you now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing so that I can see all of your great faces. I do want to say that Chloe should drop some community guidelines pretty soon. So we have some of our orientation leaders with us this evening, and Chloe is one of them, and she will be dropping some community guidelines, basically just a nice framework for us to work together this evening and get through tonight and get through all your questions. If for any reason any of those guidelines are not followed or anything, we really hope that that does not happen. If you happen to not follow those or anything and get removed, unfortunately, you will not be able to join the upcoming family webinar series. So just wanted to go ahead and give y'all that context. There's also some features I wanted to let y'all know about. So you should not be able to unmute yourselves. That is simply to make sure we're not kind of talking over each other. And you know how Zoom is, the audio gets kind of funky sometimes. So want to watch out for that as well. However, we know that y'all have some questions you want to get answered, and we definitely want to get those answered for y'all. So what you will do, if you have any questions, you are welcome to drop those in the chat, and you will send those directly to either McKenna, one of our orientation leaders, or Rosa Giunelli, another orientation leader. And they will send those to me, and we will get those asked for you as much as possible. So again, if you have any questions, drop those directly in the chat to either McKenna or Rosa Giunelli, and it'll have your options on there as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hop off my soapbox and hand it over to Chris and Freddie.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. I am Chris Graham, and I serve as the Director of Fraternity and Sorority Life here at Florida State. And Freddie, I'll allow you to introduce yourself, and then I'll share a couple of comments, and then I will kick it back to you to go over the PowerPoint.
Hey everyone, my name is Freddie Juarez, and I am the Associate Director of Fraternity and Sorority Life here at Florida State.
Awesome. So as I shared, it's nice to see everyone. I know there's probably a lot of interest in fraternity and sorority life, and what is the fall going to look like? Are we going to have recruitment? Are we going to have intake and rush and all those great things? So Freddie's going to give a very, very brief high-level overview of the community and the councils in just a few moments. And then we're going to try to leave as much time as possible for questions. and answers, because that's probably going to be some of the most fruitful aspects of this evening. But before Freddie did that, I did just want to share broadly, we have released our fraternity and sorority life plan for the fall semester, and that's on our website. Our website and our social media information is on Freddie's and I's background. And so if you need that, that should be there the entire evening during our time together. So I would encourage you to go to that plan, review it. There's a section there called the joining process, which is where we give much more detail about what the fall will look like in terms of Panhellenic formal recruitment, in terms of IFC Rush and MGC and MPHC intake. However, there's a lot of details that is not in that plan and that will be forthcoming, in particular to the women that register to go through the process to join Panhellenic recruitment. Same thing for the men for IFC Rush and MGC and MPHC intake for those men and women. But it's a pretty broad and comprehensive plan. Although there are some questions that still have yet to be answered in the plan. That is because we're waiting for the university to finalize and confirm a few things before we update that. But we are very proud of the plan that we've been able to develop. And we also know and understand that it's going to take a lot of individual and organizational responsibility to really help us have a successful fall. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Freddie.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to go over our 4 governing councils, what they are, just a brief overview, and then also each individual's joining process in a little bit of detail, just to give you like a 30,000-foot view of what those joining processes will eventually look like. So the Interfraternity Council. So first, actually, for what a governing council is, so our fraternities and sororities, we have over 40 some, give or take a couple. And what that is we kind of broke them up. Historically, they've been broken up into 4 governing councils to make it a little easier, shared values within the groups that kind of join, and make it a little bit easier for them to kind of coalition build and then join those organizations. So our Interfraternity Council are some of our oldest historical fraternities, from dating back nationally to the 1700s, early 1800s. And so the Interfraternity Council kind of hosts and formally hosts the IFC Rush, which is that kind of their way of joining those organizations. So in theory, most of our organizations, if not all organizations currently right now, are housed. And that's kind of the Interfraternity Council. If you're kind of driven around campus and you like see some fraternity letters, traditionally it's the IFC fraternity. So they kind of follow some service and academics and philanthropies as well. All of our councils kind of have those kind of same values of brotherhood, sisterhood, leadership, service, and scholarship. And so there's not really a lot of difference between them, except for their respective organizations, and as well as when I get into the Multicultural Greek Council and National Panhellenic Council, some differences that exist with those organizations. For Rush, it's typically held in the fall and spring. They're held in both times. They're not held over the summer. And we have several plans that we've outlined, especially for IFC Rush, that you can find in a whole lot more detail on our website. And I'm not going to go verbatim through every single point on our website, because I would just be rereading everything that's on the website to you, and that'd be incredibly boring. But to give you a gist, we will have some version of an orientation for them that will happen virtually online. Then we will have a chapter preview, which will engage in a Zoom platform, kind of like this, where each person will have an opportunity to meet the chapters. And this is before there's any formal meeting in terms of one-on-one. And then after that, there will be some virtual options for them to do Zoom meetings, as well as there might be, depending on where we are in our plan, there might be some in-person small group get-togethers at the chapter facilities with social distancing guidelines and lots of different restrictions that you can go see on our plan. Like I said, that is if we continue on our current one, which right now we're on the state plan. What we have done with our plans for joining processes in particular is that we've divided them up into 3 different options: the Florida option, the state option, the university option. This isn't a choose your own adventure that your student will just choose which one they want to go through. The university will make that selection for your student. And so it is based on safety, it is based on health professionals, and that is the same across the board for all our joining processes. And so currently right now, if Rush was tomorrow, that's exactly how it would be, what I just outlined, right? So there is that virtual orientation, a virtual house preview is what we call it. and then some virtual, some hybrid model of Zoom meetings with combination of small groups in person. For our Multicultural Greek Council and the National Panhellenic Council, these are our culturally based fraternities and sororities. Our Multicultural Greek Council is very identity-based, surrounding Latinx identities. We do have some Afro-Caribbean identities in there, Asian American Pacific Islander identities, and these are kind of groups that have formed around those identities as fraternities and sororities, really focus on service and especially giving back an education about their communities and their culture. The National Panhellenic Council is what we traditionally call the Divine Nine. These are the 9 historically Black African-American fraternities and sororities across the country. They are traditionally Black African-American, but not exclusively Black African-American, in the same way that our Multicultural Greek Council, although will be a Latin organization or an Asian American organization, they are not exclusively that. It just means that their culture is rooted in some of those pieces. And so our MPHC and our Multicultural Greek Council, aka MGC, they do a process that is different from IFC Rush and our Panhellenic Association sorority recruitment. They do something called intake. It is less of a formal piece and way more informal, way more one-on-one and small scale. For that information, we will be having some orientations that people will have to go through to even qualify to be a part of that process. And so once they qualify and they go through all the pieces that kind of teach them what those councils are about, what intake means, what discretion means, and all these other words that sometimes get confusing for our students that are trying to join those councils. We try to like just go through all that and kind of help them understand. Because of the small nature of those councils, we typically will have an easier time with the Zoom pieces and some of those things as we'll kind of see. So it'll be a lot more of that informal conversation that will happen one-on-one via Zoom, or like saying, hey, we're gonna meet up here at Starbucks and practice social distancing and just get to know each other a little bit more. Or it may mean you virtually engaging in the events that they will host through Zoom and some of those other layers. So our website will have more information on that, and especially to help guide you through intake. Typically, we don't see first-time in college students going straight into our MGC and National Panhellenic Council. We see upper division transfers, and we also see non-FTIC students that have been at Florida State for a little bit or have some college credits that are a little bit more ingrained in the system. Florida State will kind of see those, whereas our IFC and our Panhellenic Association will typically see a high volume of first-time in college students and upper division transfer students, so a little bit of both. So for our Panhellenic Association, these are our 17 sororities that are under the umbrella of the National Panhellenic Conference. So these are the oldest sororities, not the only sororities, but some of the oldest. And so again, if you've driven around and you do see those sorority houses, those are them. And traditionally they're our largest organizations on campus, with an average member size of anywhere between 200 to 250 plus. And so they, because of the nature of the process and their historic kind of piece and the fact that they're so large, we have a formal process for them called sorority recruitment. And this one will happen before school officially kicks off, before the fall semester starts, happens the week right prior. In various different ways. And so we do have Florida State and University plan. Like I said, today, if recruitment was tomorrow, we would be on this state plan. And so the state plan, what that outlines is that they will also have a virtual orientation. I actually just hit send on any PNM that's been registered so far, and they'll be receiving a link to join our portal for that online orientation so they could begin. They will then have a virtual scholarship round that will happen asynchronously, which means it won't happen with any interaction per se over Zoom with a member. They'll be given access to modules, make decisions from there, and then go into a virtual round after that, which will engage in Zoom. So it'll be very much like this, except there'll be a lot more talking amongst each other and more conversation in breakout rooms rather than us just giving you a presentation. And that one talks about finances. Then they move into another virtual round of Zoom, and then eventually they get into sisterhood round. The only difference between our state and our university plan is that our sisterhood round would be in person in the state. So again, if recruitment was tomorrow, sisterhood round would be in person. Lots and lots of restrictions, cleaning, social distancing guidelines, lots of guidelines to make that happen and be safe. And then an in-person bid distribution. For university, the only difference would be that all that is virtual. So again, we'll see where we are in August, and we will make the call and announce that. Again, that is not a choose your own adventure. People don't just be like, I select for that one. We will select that for you, and we will communicate that with anyone that is registered. For both the Interfraternity Council and the Panhellenic Association, it does require you to do a pre-registration online. And those can both be available at campusdirector2.com. Pretty much if you go to our website, it'll link you there. No need to memorize any URLs or any of that stuff. And then the only other piece that I'll mention with when it comes to sorority recruitment is that there is a fee to register. Same with IFC. IFC, the fee is $30, right, Chris? And then for Panhellenic, it's $130. And those things go specifically towards funding the actual processes that it goes through. There is there's a large difference between $30 and $130 because of Panhellenic Association's more robust kind of program of how they put it on. That's kind of where that goes. All the penny goes back into it. There's nothing extra, there's no overhead that's charged, none of that stuff, none of the fee. It's just one flat fee to get in the door, and that's kind of how it goes. Anything you'd like to add, Chris?
No, I think you've covered it. I think the only thing I would add before we move on is, we've spent a lot of time thinking through how the pandemic have impacted these processes and what are the best paths forward. While, again, as Freddie shared, our priority is, and it always is, but in addition to everything going on with COVID, is the health and safety of our students that are going through the process, the health and safety of our students that are already in these chapters, that would be taking, your son or daughter through one of these processes. And so if we stay on the state plan that we're currently under for each of the councils as it relates to students having the opportunity to join, know that there's lots of precautions that we have taken, that we will be taking in terms of social distancing, in terms of required face covering, in terms of sanitation guidelines and all of those different things that we would have in place. And even if we don't do anything in person, know that we are committed to ensuring that any student that comes to Florida State in the fall have the opportunity to still join a sorority or fraternity if that's what they choose to do this fall.
And another piece is that regardless of which plan we are in, someone may choose to go through a virtual process regardless of whether they're doing in person, and we are ready to accommodate that. And any of the joining processes, we will accommodate anyone that wants to engage virtually, regardless of where they're recruiting from, whether that's in the residence hall or at home, wherever they may call home. So we're ready to kind of facilitate that process for all our councils, not just for one or the other. So there's nothing else. We'll move on to essentially the questions and answers.
Perfect. I think we got a question. Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it. I think one of the questions that we got that will really be a good transition piece is, why should students join a fraternity or sorority or get involved in fraternity and sorority life? Like, what are some of those benefits? What does that look like for students?
That's a great question that we often get a lot. So I'll start by saying that the Florida State has over 700 registered student organizations. So all of our fraternities and sororities are registered student organizations, right? There are fraternities and sororities, and so there is some unique nature to them, some of which I'll talk about in a moment, but there's over 700 options for students to get involved, connected, and engaged. And so while I certainly want as many students as possible that have a desire to join a fraternity or sorority to have the opportunity to do so, I also understand and recognize that it's not going to be for everybody, or it's not for everybody immediately, right? So like, some students may decide, you know what, I really want to get to campus. I want to kind of learn, get the lay of the land. I want to get my academics. I want to focus on my academics first and then look into joining a sorority or a fraternity or something like that. But I think I want to be clear before I directly answer the question that our hope and goal at Florida State is that students just find something to get involved in, some way that they get connected to this place, because it is a large campus and there are lots of students, but we want students to feel like they belong here and to feel like Florida State's home. Now, for our over 6,000 students that have joined a sorority or fraternity that are currently in our community, I think there's lots of tangible benefits that you're going to get from joining a fraternity or sorority that you can get or might get in another RSO, but that's not always transferable in the case, right? So the beautiful thing I like about it is that we have we have fraternities and sororities that are all shapes and sizes. So we have some sororities, in particular in our MGC and PhD community, that are much smaller. It's much more of an intimate, identity-based organization where you still have those values of leadership, service, scholarship, all of those different things, all the way up to sororities that are much larger and upwards of 260, 70 women, right? And same thing for our fraternities. We have very small ones, very large ones. And so there's different shapes and different sizes. There's some that are historically African-American and Black. There's some that are historically white, whatever the case may be. But also connected to that is the learning and development that you're going to get is a very intentional process to try to help make you the best version of yourself, right? And so when you join the community, regardless of what organization that you choose, you're going to go through a new member education process. And that new member education process is not just going to teach you information and history about the organization and about the chapter. It's also going to teach you leadership development. It's going to challenge you so that your son or daughter can grow and develop. It's also going to give them an instant, immediate network to be a part of to help navigate the rest of their college career, whether they join as a freshman or whether they decide to join as a junior. They're going to have brothers and sisters that they're instantly connected with, hopefully, that share the same values and beliefs as they do, that they can rely on, not just for college, but for the rest of their life, right? And that's something that we really try to stress to our students is this is not just it's not just a 4-year commitment, it's a for life commitment, right? And so when I think about the type of community that we have and a lot of the things that I'm hearing from the students who are in the community, I think it's on some of the best days of their college career and even beyond that, they have their brothers and sisters to rely on. On some of the most difficult days, they have their brothers and sisters to rely on. So I think that community, that sense of brotherhood and sisterhood, also the leadership development, right? Like I said, we have lots of RSOs, but leading a sorority or fraternity in particular in these days and times is one of the most challenging experiences that a college student could have, right? Whether it's dealing with a complicated brother or sister that might be having some mental health issues, or whether it's dealing with the types of budgets that a lot of our organizations have. A lot of our men and women are managing large budgets that are the size of a small business. When you think about having that many people in an organization, the revenue that the organization is producing, being the treasurer or vice president of finance, those are real tangible skills that they're learning while they're in their organization that they can directly translate into whatever it is that they decide to do professionally. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to Freddie, is I think there's some real results to show that, for example, like the last 16 or 17 semesters, the average Greek GPA is higher than a non-affiliated student's GPA. And so on average, our students who are affiliated with a fraternity or sorority are doing better academically. The past couple of years, there's been over $1 million of philanthropic dollars raised in the FSL community. We've done over 90,000 community service hours. So I think it's a real sense of being involved and being committed and trying to be committed to something that's bigger than yourself that you get out of being in a fraternity or sorority at Florida State. And I don't think that's unique to us, but I think it is something that is certainly special. And it's hard to really fully understand until you're in it, if that makes sense. So Freddie, I don't know if there's other things that you'll add, but those are some initial thoughts about tangible benefits.
No, I think you covered it. You got it all.
That was awesome. Okay, thanks so much, Chris. So we have a lot of questions about the anticipated dates for the recruitment week, and with that, what the move-in process will look like if students will be living on campus.
So for you all, so our dates are on our website. You can see it, but I'll share them here. August 13th is going to be our orientation. It'll happen virtually. And then from there, we will do scholarship round virtually as well. And students will have from August 14th to the 16th to do their virtual modules, if you will. And then August 17th is when we would begin investment round virtually. Those are 2 days. So 2 days after that, I think that's the 16th, we will have investment round, our leadership and service round 2 days after that, which should be the 18th and 19th. those would be preference round, sisterhood round. And then bid day would be that Sunday and our bid distribution. So that's kind of how that's going to go for early move-in. If you are moving into a residence hall, there will be an announcement that we'll be making relatively soon. I can't give you an exact estimate because we're still working with University Housing on when that announcement is going to be made, and that information is going to come from them and supported by us. We work in partnership with University Housing. There's nothing extra that any student would have to do except just read their email, and that's about it. We take care of all the stuff on the back end. There's no extra process to register. We transfer all the registration information over to University Housing to make sure they get you lined up and signed up right. And so that information will come out relatively soon. In theory, if August 13th is where we go with that, then it might be sooner or it might be around that time. So just in theory, if you will, if you look at our historical data.
The other thing I'll say really quickly is the housing move-in piece, because I know that might be a particular piece that some folks are focused on, in particular for our out-of-state parents and families. With housing move-in being different in general this year due to COVID, is that students will have the option to start moving in much earlier, because there's going to be less students that's going to be able to move in every single day, if that makes sense, to accommodate for all of the changes that the university is making due to COVID-19. So whereas the women going through the pandemic recruitment process would have historically moved in much earlier than most other students, that won't be quite the case this year, if that makes sense. They will still have the opportunity to move in, but move in for everyone will be pushed up, if that makes sense. And as Freddie said, those specifics about dates and times will come from University Housing. I believe that's going to come out this week. Don't quote me on that, but I think by the end of this week, early next week at the latest, that information about dates and times and all of that regarding move-in will come out from University Housing. And I think you'll see what I mean there. But there's going to be less students moving in every day to try to make sure that folks are staying as safe as possible. So whereas historically, all of our women going through the pandemic recruitment process have moved in on the same day. And then there's been 2 days of move-in for all of the general student population once they got to campus. But of course, that's going to be spread out over the course of several days, if not weeks. But the thing I can say is that all of our women who are going through the pandemic recruitment process that are living on campus, I can't speak for off-campus apartment complexes, but that are living on campus will have the opportunity to move in prior to us starting with orientation on the date that Freddie provided.
And that is specifically for anyone with on-campus housing. So that's just an important caveat. We do not have an established relationship with off-campus apartments in terms of like FSL. So the only people we speak to is University Housing, and the only thing I can speak to is University Housing. So I would just share that. So whatever anybody else is doing, that's on them.
Thank you all so much. Our next question is, so can you explain a little bit, if you look on your website, you'll find something about scorecards. And so can you go a little bit more in depth of what those scorecards are and kind of what goes into the scoring?
That's a great question. So I'll say up front, there's no scoring involved, although that would probably be fun for the number of chapters that we have. So we call it a scorecard. Essentially, think of it as a brief snapshot that you all get to get as family members, as parents, incoming students, current students, into each of our fraternities and sororities. And so you'll see there's information listed there about their conduct. If there's no information listed there about their conduct and it says in good standing, then that means that they have no previous conduct history for the last 3 to 4 years. You'll see some of our chapters have some conduct history there. I would encourage you to look at that. I would encourage you to think about what that means. I would encourage you to have conversations with your students, that are coming to Florida State in the fall, in particular looking at the type of conduct violations that they have had and been found responsible for, because that could give you an important snapshot into maybe the culture, or maybe there's been just some past issues that they've had and they're not cultural, right? And so there's the conduct history information listed there. There's information there listed about their GPA. There's information there listed about the number of new members that they've had. There's information there, I believe, listed on their new member GPA, so you can see how well their new members, and what we mean by new members is the students who joined the chapter at the previous semester, if that makes sense, right? There's also information there about number of community service hours, number of brothers and sisters in leadership positions in other RSOs. There's information there about number of philanthropic dollars raised, right? And we developed the scorecards 3 years ago because we wanted and desired to try to be as transparent as possible with everyone. Like I said, parents, family, incoming students, community members, about what all of our organizations are doing. And as you'll see, they're broken down by council. So the council overview that Freddie shared at the beginning could be very helpful for something like this, in particular for folks who might not be as familiar with fraternities and sorority lives. Those 4 councils are just governing bodies, but they're broken down into councils, and you'll see as you go through each of the councils and click on them, that not all of them are the same, right? In terms of conduct background, in terms of number of philanthropic dollars that they've raised, in terms of community service, in terms of leadership. And we want you to know that. We want to be upfront about that. And so that's a brief overview of the scorecards. The other thing I'll say, which hopefully helps make this even clearer, is there's a garnet, there's chapters that are in garnet, and then there's chapters that are in gold. I hope I don't get this reversed, Freddie, but garnet are the chapters that are in good standing, gold are the chapters that are not in good standing. So you can, even if you don't really understand a lot, or if you don't understand anything about fraternity and sorority life, when you click on a council, all of the chapters that fall under that council that we have on our campus or that we have had, all of those chapters will pop up, and you'll see some are gold, some are garnet, right? And that is a instant, clear differentiation between chapters that are in good standing and chapters that are in bad standing. Really quickly, good standing literally means exactly what it might sound like. They're in good standing. There's no current conduct issues that the chapter is currently facing in terms of probation or anything like that. Bad standing means that they are not in good standing. Usually that almost always revolves around conduct, where the organization has been found responsible, and they're currently on probation or currently going through our conduct process as an organization. So hopefully that's helpful, but if there's any additional questions about the scorecards, happy to answer them.
The only thing I'll add is that, especially as a family member, you may be very interested in the part that says whether or not they were suspended or they're no longer recognized by the institution. We get a lot of phone calls from concerned family members saying that their insert son or daughter here or child was, like they got a bill for X amount of dollars, and they list out the fraternity name, and it turns out, and we like, hey, we've suspended that fraternity 3 years ago, and this is why we suspended them, so you should really check out our scorecard. And like at that point, there's not much we can do. Some of our students feel very strongly about the Constitution of the United States and their ability to still gather, even though the university has told them you have hazed a lot and you should be suspended. And so that's something that you really need to focus on when your student comes home or calls you and says, hey, I'm trying to join this organization. Ask the organization's name and then go check them out in the scorecard to make sure that they're actually not suspended. Because if they were separated from the institution, they lost their recognition. There is a very good reason for why that occurred. We do not just randomly select organizations to remove from campus because we feel like it. It is typically surrounding hazing or another egregious matter that needed or kind of required that separation on our end. So just keep that in mind as you kind of navigate that process.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll add one thing really quickly and then we can move on. Like, in particular, if you look at our IFC section, that you're going to see quite a few chapters that are no longer recognized by the university, where there's been a loss of recognition and those chapters have been suspended and closed. I would encourage you to have conversations about what that might mean for your son, in potentially being connected to one of those organizations, but also for our women who might, some of the men in those organizations that have been suspended and removed from the institution still try to function. They still try to have social events and things like that. And so I don't think it's just an issue for the young men in terms of them having an opportunity to join. I would also think about for our women that might get invited to certain events or social functions with those organizations. It's just not safe. It's not smart. And it's certainly not something that I would want for my son or daughter. And so I think it's something that I would certainly have a conversation with my loved one if they were coming to college.
Thank y'all so much. I do just want to remind y'all to drop your questions directly to McKenna and Rosa Janelli in the chat box. If you're not sure, you can change the two. And so you can just change that to either McKenna or Rosa Janelli, and they will handle your questions and pass those on to me from there. Our next question is, so we know a lot of pieces are moving. We still don't entirely know kind of what the fall may look like in terms of rush and recruitment and all of those pieces. But are you all able to give a snapshot of dates for fraternity rush and what that process will look like, similar to what y'all gave for sorority recruitment?
Sure. So Freddie gave the dates for our Panhellenic recruitment process for our fraternities that are part of our National Panhellenic Council and our Multicultural Read Council. Those timelines will remain very similar to what they've been in the past. As Freddie shared, because those processes happen on a chapter level and not the FSL or council level, those processes will continue and they're very individualized to the respective chapter. For our IFC fraternities, historically, we've done rush, like the quote unquote formal rush week, usually the second or third week in September, depending on the start date of the semester. And we are looking around a similar date range to anywhere from September 15th to October 1st kind of timeline, if you will, for the actual formal rush process to happen. However, we're still finalizing those dates and those details as to what exactly the rush process would look like, but the timeline will be generally around the same. The challenge, just to be transparent with you all, the challenge we have with that is Panhellenic formal recruitment will happen before school starts and go all the way up until that 23rd, which is the Sunday, and then we start school on that Monday, the 24th. A lot of what that timeline will look like for our IMC fraternities will have a lot to do with what the opening of the semester looks like, right? So, hopefully all goes well, everyone stays safe. We have a minimal number, if anyone, that tests positive for COVID, and there's not huge outbreaks and things like that. But if things get worse and we do have some of those types of things happening, then obviously we would have to adjust that timeline that we have for IFC formal rush that normally happens in the fall. So, but our goal is to try to stick around that same time frame of September 15th through October 1 in terms of those types of dates. But we're also going to have to be flexible and respond to the university community.
Thanks so much, Chris. So we're getting a lot of questions about what meal plans will look like if you're involved in fraternity and sorority life. So are y'all able to speak a little bit more about what meal plans may look like, especially for students who are going through recruitment and what that will look like as they are starting that before school even starts?
So for the only council that has any sort of meal plan is our Panhellenic organizations. All 17 of them have a meal plan built into their dues that they pay. And so starting on day one, the moment that they are a member, they're kind of indoctrinated into that, and they'll get access to that meal plan. Each chapter is following their own safety guidelines regarding that. And so we've made recommendations based on industry standard, industry being the fraternity and sorority life industry, across the board, across the country. They've set out kind of different parameters for what those should look like, aka no buffet, all single serve, things like that, incredible cleaning, shifts, a lot of those pieces. And from my understanding of working with all these organizations, they are all making changes like that, and we'll be announcing those specifically during recruitment. In our investment round presentation, they go very heavy into what meals they offer, when and how many and how often. Traditionally, it is lunch Monday through Friday, dinners Sunday through Thursday, and that's kind of traditionally what is offered for being in a sorority meal kind of meal plan for Panhellenic organizations. That is all built into the dues, which is what elevates the dues to be where they're at. And we get that asked a lot of like, why are dues so expensive? It is because they include the meal plan in it. So about 3/4 of the dues money goes towards the meal plan. And it doesn't matter whether you live in the house or outside of the house, you have access to that meal plan. We do know that there are some students who have asked us if they can participate as a new member virtually. We are not mandating or kicking people out if they participate virtually. And so that, though, is still up in the air as to what dues will be. Like, obviously they don't have access to the meal plan. So like, if I am in South Florida and I can't get access to my meal, what do my dues look like? Those are questions that I can transparently tell you I do not have an answer for today, but we will by the time recruitment comes. So that's something to take in mind and consideration. However, that shouldn't dissuade you from joining and trying to join. So that is one thing with meal plans that's a caveat to that. When it comes to university meal plans, there is some accommodation that our Seminole Dining office does for students that have a sorority meal plan. So if they have a pre-purchased meal plan with Seminole Dining, there is an option for them during the first week of school for them to reduce their meal plan. I think it's to the 65, Seminole 65, I think that's what it's called. Don't quote me. You can find out. We will have more information that we will have on our website at some point. But there's a specific one that allows you to reduce it, and that usually serves as a complement to the sorority meal plan, not as a takeaway. They kind of work in concert. So that's kind of a lot on meal plans.
Thanks so much, Freddie. I think you kind of mentioned how, that's included in the dues. And so I think that is a good segue to the next question I was going to ask y'all. Getting a lot of questions about what does it look like in terms of cost to be a part of fraternity and sorority life?
It's a good question. So I'm going to give some ranges and I'll start with our Panhellenic Association. Each of our 17 Panhellenic organizations, generally you have to pay for the same thing, but when you pay for what you get, if that makes sense, might be different. So as an example, like there might be 10 t-shirts, and I'm just giving you a t-shirt example. Obviously there's more like important things like ritual equipment, new member materials, things like that. But sorority A, you might pay for all 10 of your t-shirts up front. Sorority B, you might pay for all 10 of those t-shirts spread out over the course of a semester, right? So generally speaking, you're going to get the same thing. One of the differences is the housing component, right? So we have some organizations that have a brand new house, and of course, what it costs to live in that facility might be a little bit more expensive in comparison to a facility that is a little bit older that might not offer the same types of amenities, if that makes sense. But generally speaking, what you're going to get is going to be very standard and very similar in terms of new member materials, in terms of your pin, in terms of your badge, in terms of all of those different materials that you're going to get. And regardless of chapter, the semester you join is usually the most expensive semester because, again, there's things that you're paying for up front that you're going to get throughout your new member education experience that you're not going to have to worry about because you already paid for it once you become a second semester freshman, a sophomore, et cetera, right? So for our 17 Panhellenic sororities, we have an entire round called investment where they'll talk specifics about what each of their sororities cost. And there'll be an opportunity for all of our potential new members that's going through that process to get that information, to write that information down, to take that into consideration as they think about what might be the best option for them. And financials are an important aspect of what the best option would be for them. But I mean, that can range anywhere from $1,500 to $1,700 a semester, all the way up to $3,000 a semester, right? Again, that just depends on which sorority, like the housing component, the meal plan component, and what you're getting and when you're paying for what you get. For our IMC fraternities, those dues are much cheaper. Again, a part of that, as Freddie shared, is none of those fraternities have meal plans, and so that would not be an option for any young man that's joining one of those 15 fraternities. All of them have a chapter facility, and those dues can range anywhere in a semester from about $700 to $1,500 per semester, right? Again, that just kind of depends on how they offer what it is that you would be getting, what your family member or son or daughter might be getting as a new member. For our MGC and MPHC fraternities and sororities, those organizations, you tend to front load a lot of the finances of what it costs to join those organizations. And so instead of me instead of if I join a Panhellenic sorority, I'm going to pay dues each semester, and that's going to be spread out twice over the course of 4 years, generally speaking, right? If I join as a freshman, if I join as a sophomore, twice, fall and spring, spread out over the course of 3 years. For our MGC and PhD fraternities and sororities, you tend to pay the most of that cost up front, and that can range anywhere from about $750 all the way up to $3,000, $3,500, depending on the organization that you join. But once you've made that investment, whatever that is, generally speaking, you have very, very, very low chapter dues that you'll just pay for the remainder of your time after you join an PhD or MGC fraternity or sorority.
Thank you so much. Our next question is a little bit more broad, I guess, but really wanting a little bit more of the IFC information. And so how can students get involved in that? How will they learn about what that process, when will take place, what that process looks like, all of those things?
It's a great question. The best way to make sure that you're getting the most updated information is two things. One, I would encourage you to follow the social media that Freddie and I have on the back of our screens. Secondly is I would encourage you to go to fsuifc.com and register for Rush. As Freddie shared, that cost is much, 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 much lower than what it costs to register for Panhellenic recruitment. And, like Panhellenic recruitment, we're going to be purchasing masks, t-shirts, there's lots of things that as to why that cost is much higher. For IFC, it's much lower. And so I would encourage you all to have your son or family member or nephew or whatever it is, to go to fsuifc.com and go ahead and register for Rush, so that way they can make sure that they're getting the most updated information. The other thing that is helpful is several times a week, we batch upload all of that information and provide it to our chapters, and chapters will likely go ahead and start reaching out to young men that have registered for that process to start learning more about them, to start figuring out what their interests are, what they're passionate about. And so that just will be an easier, quicker way for them to get connected and get engaged, whether they join a fraternity or not, but certainly if they decide to join a fraternity. And then for everyone that's registered, in particular, once we get to August 1st, which is not that far away, we're going to start sending out kind of like what's already started happening with Panhellenic recruitment for the women that have registered for that process. For IFC, we're going to start sending much more periodic information and updates about times, about requirements, about all of the information that they would need to know to be successful in that process.
Thank you so much. And another question that just came in about fraternity and sorority life in general, so all of these councils, how are they supervised, advised? What does that dynamic kind of look like?
Yeah, so good question. And so so each of our fraternities and sororities have to go through a recognition process, as I shared earlier when I was answering the why FSL question. And so I think it's important to know that they go through a recognition process just like any other student organization that wants to be recognized by Florida State. And once they go through that recognition process, if they are recognized, there are certain expectations and minimum standards that they must adhere to like any other registered organization. And once they are recognized, once they go through that process and they're recognized, and that's an annual process. So it's not like, I came to Florida State in 1849 and I'm just recognized forever. They go through that process annually. Once they are recognized, then they come over to our department, and they're part of fraternity and sorority life. So all of our, 48, 49, however many it is, fraternities and sororities fall under our umbrella. We have minimum standards and expectations that they must adhere to in order to remain in good standing, right? So there's FSL policies, procedures, protocols that they must adhere to. And then there's also the student organization's code of conduct that all organizations, if you're not adhering to that, then of course you're going to go through our adjudication and our conduct process. But they're supervised by my team in fraternity sorority life. They're advised by my team in fraternity sorority life. So we have full-time paid professionals that work daily with our fraternity sorority community. And each of our organizations also have advisors that are not always, but usually members of that fraternity or sorority that work with them much more intentionally and closely when it comes to things that we don't have any oversight or control over, right? So for example, here at Florida State, we don't own any of our housing, right? So when it comes to housing issues, when it comes to rent, when it comes to roommates, all of those things, that is something that is managed and governed by the advisors of the private organization. We don't, because we don't own the houses, we're also not very involved in the meal plans in terms of what do they eat and when do they eat, how much does that cost, right? They have advisors for things like that. So there's advisors that are members of those organizations that work with them closely and intentionally. And then the university also have paid full-time staff that fall under my purview that advise and work with them. So we work with all of our chapters, and we also work with each of the 4 councils. The last thing I'll say, and then Freddie, I don't know if you have anything else, is each chapter, so whatever chapter your loved one might join, they will have an assigned professional chapter coach from Fraternity and Sorority Life that will work with the leadership and the membership of that organization. So there's a lot of advisors and there's a lot of oversight and support that they get. So hopefully that answers the question.
The only thing I'll add, Chris, is that each year, as part of those recognition pieces and the other things, there is a lot of required trainings that all of our organizations have to undergo. So not just the actual executive board officers, but the members. We have over the last year, 90% of our entire community was engaged with by our office in some way, shape, or form. We did in the areas of risk reduction and harm reduction. So just to give you an example, you know, we do over 50% of the community has been touched by our office in some way, shape, or form through leadership development training. And so we do do a lot of training and development with our organizations on the proactive side of things. So that's just the other thing I've got.
Thank y'all. We are getting tons and tons of questions about, so we know with COVID, there have been a lot of moving parts, but specifically about COVID, what do refunds look like? So for example, if students were to go home after Thanksgiving and then we not come back for spring, I'm sorry, and we're not in person for the spring semester, what would refunds, dues, and those things look like?
Yeah, that's a little bit more difficult for us to answer because, you know, we're talking about 40 something different, you know, philosophies and cost and all of that. So we don't know exactly what each organization would do and when they would do it and what would be their kind of baselines, if you will, for providing refunds and what would be refunded and all of that. And so what I would say is, as they're going through the process, whether it's the FSL orientation that they will go through before they join an organization, and certainly as they're going through the process, looking at these organizations, asking questions about them, reviewing the scorecards, having conversations with members currently in the organization, I would ask that I would encourage you to make sure that they're asking those questions. And before they sign any contracts, before they sign their bid, before they or accept their bid, before they sign, you know, their meal plan, to make sure that they are sharing that information with you all so you can make the most informed and financially informed decisions that's going to be in the best interest of your family member, you know, of your loved one. Because I can promise you, you know, all of the organizations are not going to do it the same. Right. So again, I'm sorry, like we can't share, you know, you would get this percentage of your revenue back, or you would get everything back, or everybody, you know, everybody is going to get a refund if we shut down by October 1 and all of those different things. Like I mean, every organization is going to have to make their own choice and about what those things would look like and how the refunds fall. What I can tell you about what happened in the spring is that I think organizations did provide refunds to some degree, but to be honest, I don't think everybody was happy with the way that process worked. And so again, before they make commitments and pay certain things, I would make sure that you're getting informed information and that you're getting things in writing from the organization about what refunds would look like, about what could be prorated, about all of those different things before you just pay for services.
The only thing I'll add is that most of our organizations on the campus operate semesterly to semesterly. And so some of these organizations may not be able to tell you what would happen in spring, you know, come now, because they're going to tell you everything about fall. And so especially as these organizations are trying to get their members to join, they're going to tell you like, this is fall, this is current, this is spring. And so it's important for you to realize and ask the questions of when is the time I can go back, right? Like, so when is the after this day, I am bound to pay versus if I have up to this day to say I'm not doing any of this stuff, I'm backing out. That's an important question for you all to know. Because there are those days and they differ from organization to organization. Some people give you a week, say this is a 7-day trial, Netflix style, and you can go in and then after that you're good. Someone might give you a month. Someone might say you have up to a month, maybe you prorate it and you only have to pay for that month and then you can leave if that's not something you're interested in or things change. So those questions are incredibly important on the front end, but they do operate very much semesterly to semesterly with the full fiscal year under consideration, if that makes sense. So there is like some stop gaps where you can be like, okay, I'm backing out here and then I won't owe money, but that varies per organization.
Thank y'all. And I think we may have time for one more question. What does the time commitment look like to be a part of fraternity and sorority life?
Great question. So generally speaking, what I tell students and family members is to just kind of be like an average member. And what I mean by average, I don't mean like you're just decent and not a good member, but like to be involved, to pay your dues, to be active, to go to attend chapter meetings, to go to the philanthropies and be a part of the community service events, and to go to the social activities. You're talking about, on average, adding another 3-hour credit course to your schedule, right? Again, it's actually going to be a little more than that your first semester, because of course you're adding the experience and the new member education process into your first semester when you join. But after you get through the new member education process and you're initiated, you're an active brother or sister, you are adding on average about another 3-hour credit course to your schedule, right? So you might have an hour chapter meeting on a Sunday afternoon, you might have an hour committee meeting on a Wednesday afternoon, and then you might have a philanthropy that you need to go stop and check in for an hour, right? So that's 3 hours that you spent just doing sorority or just doing fraternity for that 1 week. Obviously, that's an ebb and a flow, right? That's an average, right? So there might be weeks, say for example, your sorority is planning a huge philanthropy event and you are very so for example, a lot of our sororities, every sorority and fraternity has their own philanthropy that they manage, right? But say your sorority is connected to Dance Marathon and the Children's Miracle Network, right? So leading up to Dance Marathon, it might be a little bit more than 3 hours a week. You might be spending 6 hours a week, right? Because that's your philanthropy and it's something you're passionate about, and maybe you survived and you're a miracle baby, and so you're very connected to that, right? And so you might be on the committee leading your sorority's philanthropy. Well, you're going to be spending a little bit more time in it. But on average, it's like adding another 3-hour credit course to your academic schedule. Now, I was going to say, now, I just want to be clear, especially since we have families on, like, I would encourage you to ensure to have regular conversations with your family member about how sorority is going for them, about how fraternity is going for them. Because I can tell you, while I am very, very proud that for 16, 17 semesters in a row, the all-Greek GPA has been higher than the non-affiliated student GPA, we do have some students who try to major in sorority and major in fraternity, right? And what I can tell you, even in a COVID world, no one can get a degree in sorority life. No one can get a degree in fraternity life. And so please make sure that you are doing all you can. We will certainly do all we can to try to help them remember balance and to stay focused on what it is that they're here to do. At the end of the day, they're here to have a safe, positive, memorable experience that can lead to them graduating in 4 to 5 years and moving on to the real world and getting a job and all of those things. And so we do have some students who try to get overly involved, or they get too focused on the social aspect of not just fraternity and sorority life, but Tallahassee, and they get off track and they lose their way. And so if you don't remember anything else, no one can get a degree in fraternity and sorority life at Florida State. So.
Thank y'all so much. Please give a hand to Freddie and Chris. Really appreciate y'all. Had some great questions. I also want to thank y'all for attending and asking some really great questions. I know that There were so many that we definitely did not get through them all. But please make sure if you look on Freddie and Chris's virtual backgrounds, you'll be able to see their contact info and some ways to kind of get connected with them. And before we go, I am going to just share a couple ways that your students can get connected with other students and other folks at FSU. And so definitely encourage y'all to share these with your students. So we have first year Fridays. They're a lot of fun and definitely a great way to get connected. And new student and family programs, as you can see, all of our social media and our email is going to be there. We'll post about those as well. So if you need another place to go find those. And then also want to share, virtual FSU. And so another great way to get connected and for your student to kind of get that jump start into being involved on campus and getting connected with other students and things. But thank you again so much for attending. It was so awesome to have y'all. Again, congratulations. And we are so excited to have you and your student at Florida State. Have a great rest of your Monday.